So Rasheed Wallace is a Celtic.
He is.
And
officially today.
The rocks are still popping in my mouth. We'll move on. Now, Tim, you wrote a column in this week's Standard Times, and it was a pretty positive piece about Wallace and his exodus from Detroit into Boston. And I think that's generally the take. That I think everyone would agree it's a pretty good signing. It's on par with Vince Carter going to Orlando and Shaq going to Cleveland. I mean, they've all now added a guy in his 30s who's contributed to a championship team, not Vince Carter, but
and who to a guy like me who's a real passive basketball fan sounds like a real big name that's going to make a big impact. Like if it were still 1998.
Well, Rasheed Wallace is a good player. Here's my take on him, and I'll let Tim kind of have a more informed look at Rasheed Wallace. Now, I mentioned last week, I just don't particularly like to watch Rasheed Wallace play. His game kind of irritates me. It's his attitude irritates me. The little bald spot on his head irritates me. He's an irritating guy.
A lame beer for a new generation?
He has a lame beer. To me, it's like bringing in lame beer to the Celtics, and it just doesn't. I think it's more of a risk than people seem to think. I know that you say he's a good teammate, and maybe he is, but is he that good? Do you think he's still that good of a player, Tim?
I think for what they're looking for out of him, he definitely is. What a lot of people are overlooking when they look at Rasheed Wallace is he does have that tendency to kind of play down to his opponent sometimes. If he doesn't feel that he's being challenged, he'll zone out. Chauncey Billups famously said that on a television program. He said that if a guy isn't up to his level, he just gets bored. And that's kind of been what we've been seeing from Rasheed Wallace the last few years. I mean, he's been on a team where, 2 years ago when they played the Celtics in the playoffs, they're making a great run. Last year, all the turmoil with Allen Iverson and
he did nothing he averaged 6 points a game in there as they got swept.
And when you're looking at this fall off of his commitment to Detroit, that's what we're looking back at, and that's what we're judging Rasheed Wallace on. But look at what he did for that team for 5 years before that.
But those 5 years, those are gone, aren't they?
I'm just talking in terms of his desire, his commitment, what he can bring to this team in terms of being that other veteran guy. What they lacked last year was that James Posey off the bench, that veteran leader on the bench.
I think what they lacked last year was Kevin Garnett's knees.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm talking over the course of the entire season.
But
did
they miss him that much? Did they miss Posey?
They missed what he brought to the bench. They were talking about it as early as November, December, January, saying, we don't have this veteran guy off the bench.
But
first and foremost,
Wallace, he does. Okay, Rasheed Wallace is a good player. I looked through his numbers. I was a little surprised.
They seem low, though. His numbers do seem low.
I was very surprised at how bad his shooting percentage is, and I had no idea that half his shots are three-pointers.
Well, that's the problem.
But I mean, obviously his defense and his rebounding and his blocked shots are something that they've never had. That's been their problem. They've got these great guys in Baby Davis and Poe who work hard, have some game, but they're short.
And they're short, and you're either going to get one or the other from them. You're either going to get the offense or you're going to get the defense. You're not going to get both of them, both out of them in the same game. Part of that could be their youth. But with Rasheed Wallace, they're bringing in somebody who can contribute in situations where, now you don't have to have Paul Pierce on the floor necessarily, or Ray Allen on the floor, or Kevin Garnett. You can get these guys off and get them more rest. How many times last year did they want to pull off, a member of the big three, but they still had to leave one of them on because there wasn't that scoring threat to stay out there? Now he's going to at least stretch the floor when they are all on the court together, and when they're not, they give them somebody that can score the ball and can kind of command the same respect that one of the big three would.
The thing, looking through his stats, the thing that was, you weigh his attitude and his numbers aren't that great, and then you look down at his playoff stats and you realize that the guy's been in the playoffs every year of his career, and that includes a run with Portland. And Portland's made a comeback, but you never thought of them as a team that was a playoff team every year either, even in that stretch.
Well, they did have that ridiculously long streak of making the playoffs for every season for 20 years or something.
But still, it's impressive that Rasheed Wallace, with both Portland and Detroit was in the playoffs every year, but he's also
And that was they weren't just in the playoffs; they were legitimate threats in the West during that stretch. They had a trip to the finals in there too with that famed Game 7 where they blew the lead in Los Angeles.
Was that with Rasheed Wallace?
I believe it was.
What the problem is the Rasheed Wallace that we see now, the guy who came to Detroit. He's kind of, I don't want to say toned down more, but you tend to forget how much of a problem he might have been on those earlier teams. I forgot. When I was writing that piece, I forgot. An emailer...
Yeah, he was really rough.
An emailer sent me an email about an incident where he had actually, in practice, thrown a ball at a teammate's head, and then him and another guy were laughing about it as the guy laid on the floor dazed and couldn't get up. I mean, and that's...
I've done that to Kuchar before, though.
But I probably deserved it.
You did.
That's true.
You had it coming.
And you would go over and at least help him up afterwards.
Never.
After a few minutes.
I was trying to build toughness.
Yeah, poke me with a stick,
Tough luck.
perhaps.
That's how you do it in newspapers.
It's a rugged time.
We've kind of seen, I hate to say it, but a softer Rasheed Wallace in the last few years because of, he's been on a championship contending team. He's been around, a pretty character guys in Detroit. I mean, they're the kind of team that isn't going to take a lot of crap from somebody. Just ask Allen Iverson. And now he's coming to the Celtics, which are probably the ultimate team of having that type of character in today's NBA.